Allow me to introduce myself.
I am the last sane sports fan.
I am a genius by trade.
I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy?
Hello everyone and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. Well, let's get right to it today. The St. Louis Blues re-signed Ken Hitchcock to a one-year deal. Financial terms were not disclosed, but this really kind of opens up that bucket of worms that kind of got brought up a few weeks ago. Basically, the St. Louis Blues brought back Ken Hitchcock. They kind of undermined him a little bit by flirting so much with Mike Babcock when it was clear that they weren't going to have the money to lure him to St. Louis. So they've kind of stabbed the coach in the back a little bit right there. But I still believe that the St. Louis Blues had to do their due diligence in that kind of situation, because Mike Babcock is obviously younger. He's as good, if not better, of a coach, along the same level. He's won Stanley Cup. He's won gold medals with Team Canada. He obviously gets the best out of his players, but he's also got a certain style that doesn't necessarily fit with everybody. And that's one of the problems that the St. Louis Blues have right now with Ken Hitchcock, is that there are whispers within the locker room that are starting to leak out that basically that is one of the big problems that the St. Louis Blues players have with Coach Ken Hitchcock, is his style of play. There's a lot of rumors going around that it's too constrictive, that they're not allowed to play the way that they want to play. They're not allowed to have enough creativity when you're out on the ice. I haven't been to practices. I don't necessarily know what the crux of that problem would be, because to me it just doesn't make sense. To me, Ken Hitchcock holds players accountable. He wants them to play a certain way. He wants them to play a 200-foot game where they're just as accountable on the defensive end as they are on the offensive end. And to me, it's worked. I mean, Brett Hull was one of the greatest players of a generation. If not for Wayne Gretzky, Brett Hull may have gone down as one of the best goal scorers of all time. But he did not win a Stanley Cup until he played under Ken Hitchcock and was forced to play more of a defensive style, to a point to where Brett Hull even said, it hurts sometimes because Ken Hitchcock is asking me not to focus on scoring goals as much and get back and play good team defense. Well, it ultimately led Brett Hull to the promised land. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Coach Ken Hitchcock is going to lead the St. Louis Blues to a Stanley Cup victory next season, because they've put themselves in a really odd situation now. I'm a little bit surprised that they only did a one-year deal. Now, perhaps that was Ken Hitchcock's choice. Perhaps it was the team's choice. I didn't have a chance to listen to today's press conference yet. I will do that here later on. But basically, it empowers the players that do not like him already to perhaps underperform there at the beginning of the season, and then perhaps a change is made. I would like to think that players would not do that, because that's completely unprofessional, but we've seen it time and time again that perhaps they don't go out there and slack on purpose, but they don't necessarily put in 100% every single time. And I hope that that is not the case with the St. Louis Blues. But on to the major point now. It puts the St. Louis Blues in a position where really the pressure is now on Doug Armstrong, which is kind of an interesting turn from what we thought about a couple weeks ago, because we thought the pressure would be on players, we thought the pressure would be on the coach. I'm starting to believe that it's more on Doug Armstrong for this case, because you just cannot bring back that exact same team from last year. And you can't say, oh, well, there's certain unrestricted free agents that'll go and they'll bring in a free agent to replace them. That's not what I'm talking about. The players that are at the core of this team, something has to be changed. I don't know if it's Alexander Steen or TJ Oshie or Patrick Berglund or even David Backes. You got to throw all those players in the mix. As a fan, if I put my Blues fan hat on, I don't want any of those players to go. I like them as individuals. I like them as players. But from a cold, hard business aspect of it, somebody's got to go. A lot of people are going to say, well, if you take anybody's name out of there, you pick Patrick Berglund. Surprisingly, I love the guy. I love his heart. I love the flair that he can put out there on the ice. But when you look at cold, hard statistics, and I'm not usually a statistic kind of guy, but TJ Oshie, in his time with the St. Louis Blues, has never scored more than 19 goals. For all the heap of praise that is put on his shoulders, he has never really lived up to the potential that he has. He's getting $4.5 million a year for the next 2 years. And if you're not going to be over a 20-goal scorer, is that really worth the money? Now, unfortunately, what I'm starting to hear come out of the media and even some people, whispers from the locker room, is that you may not get any kind of return on TJ Oshie. His greatest value is here in St. Louis because the team has built him up so much that perhaps he was never going to be able to live up to the hype. If TJ Oshie remains with this team, I would like to see him in somewhat of a lesser role. I don't think that he's a top-line player if those are the kind of stats that he's going to be producing. I love him out on the ice. I don't necessarily want him gone from the St. Louis Blues, but when you look at the stats, he's been injury-prone. He hasn't played a full season, I believe, in his whole time here, maybe once or twice. But as I said, he hasn't scored more than 19 goals in a season. His best chance was in that season when he got the ankle injury and he scored 13 goals, but he played less than half the season, so he might have done great things there. But that in and of itself is a big decision for Doug Armstrong to make, and I would not be surprised if TJ Oshie ends up on the chopping block. Another name bandied about is unfortunately Alexander Steen. Now, I did not know this, but it's starting to come out in the media today that Alexander Steen apparently is not well liked in the locker room, not necessarily within players, but perhaps staff, maybe coaching, just kind of here or there. I mean, these are all rumors. You never know really which one to believe. But one of the words coming out is basically if the coaches go up to him to give feedback on the bench after a shift, he'll basically say bleep off or bleep you and just kind of shrug it off. Well, the guy's talented. He has scored a lot of goals, 57 in the last 2 years, and he has averaged 15 or more goals in all of his time with the St. Louis Blues. Other than 1 year, I should say that, other than 1 year, then he was hurt, and that was also the strike-shortened year as well, so he only scored 8 goals in that. But other than that, he's been a good player. Now, you want to get rid of that mentality. I mean, you can't have people saying bleep off or bleep you to the coaches. Now, I mean, this could be completely taken out of context. Maybe that's just his style. Now, you may not, as I said, you may not want to keep that kind of mentality around, but statistically, he has been in the top 3 or 4 scoring for the St. Louis Blues the last few seasons, and as we've come to find out, that goal scoring is not something that you can just say, oh, well, yeah, I'll just pick one of those up at the store. To lose a player like that, when the St. Louis Blues have had trouble scoring in the playoffs, it's a completely difficult situation, and one that I'm honestly, I'm usually very open to sharing my opinion, but I don't necessarily like this whole soccer mentality either, or European football, however you want to think about it, where you just basically say, well, we need to get that guy, we need to get this guy, we need to get this guy, get rid of all these guys. In American sports, it's not realistic to do that. And I just hesitate to give up on Alexander Steen. I would like these players to just shape up. I mean, realize what's at stake here. Obviously, your market value with other teams is not very high if St. Louis really is your best option. And that's no knock on the city of St. Louis or the organization. But when other teams are really not looking for your services, then perhaps you need to kind of look in the mirror and say, okay, well, we need to just buckle down and do what we need to do and get things done. And I mean, heck, if it comes down to it, if you want to go against the coach a little bit here or there and just say, hey, we need to just kind of open it up a little bit, we're going to do our thing. If he yells at us a little bit on the bench, that's the way it is. But the players really have to step it up. There's going to be changes. I have no doubt of that. Big changes potentially. I understand it's a situation where things are just going to be difficult. But again, I think the pressure is really on Doug Armstrong. And if he doesn't get it done, then he is obviously going to be on the chopping block. And perhaps that is kind of the reason that Coach Ken Hitchcock only is coming back for one more year. Because if they don't get it done, I honestly think that both the coach and the general manager will be changed next season. One more little note kind of going along with that idea of the players needing to step up and do things right is basically that as I said, the players just have to find a way to get things done and step up, fill that leadership role. And I'm not talking about just wearing the C as a captain, but there's something going wrong in that locker room, and players are just not playing quite. They're second-guessing themselves, or something is going wrong. For example, you can't have Alex Pietrangelo, who is no doubt one of the better defensemen in the league. I don't necessarily know that he belongs in that upper-tier crust, but he is a top-line defenseman. But he finished last year -2. You cannot do that. I mean, I'm sorry. I understand that there's extenuating circumstances. Your offense doesn't necessarily play very well. Sometimes you get caught out of position, this and that. But if you are averaging 25 minutes on the ice every single night, you cannot be a minus player and expect to be considered one of the best players on your team, maybe even in the league. The St. Louis Blues defensive core, their offensive core, everybody on that team has to find a way to do things better. And again, putting my fan hat on, it's really kind of an interesting situation how things change over the course of really only a week or two. Because if you had talked to me right after the season, maybe even a week after, I was in that camp that's like, you just got to make changes. You got to gut this team. You got to not necessarily blow it up, but really find a way to just cycle through this, get some new fresh blood in there. Now all of a sudden, I'm not quite so sure that the changes have to be made. There's no doubt about that. You cannot come back with the same exact team and expect different results any longer. But I'm not quite sure the changes are going to be made in the way that fans were clamoring for a couple weeks ago because of contract situations, because of market value, and simply because the talent is there. That is what is so desperately frustrating about this situation, is that the talent is there. These players aren't as talented as we were led to believe as St. Louis Blues fans. I've given up on that. We have been sold a bill of goods. These players aren't necessarily as great as we want to believe, but they are still good, talented players. They can compete with anybody in the league. They can beat anybody in the league when they're playing at their best. But for some reason, they don't always play at their best, and something has to change. And if nothing else, hopefully it is player mentality, because you can't have your top defenseman as a minus player. You can't have your most marketable player causing issues in the locker room. You can't have one of your top scorers saying bleep you to the coaching staff on the bench. There has to be somewhat of a change. I'm not pulling the wool over my eyes. That stuff happens in other markets with other teams, but it's just too pervasive right now with the St. Louis Blues to expect any more success. Hopefully the right changes are made. I want to believe in Doug Armstrong. I think that he'll get the job done, but if not, then unfortunately St. Louis Blues fans are in for more heartbreak next summer, and we will have those big changes coming. For sure, definitely next summer if the same things happen over again. That is the view from the Midwest. I apologize for the jumpy camera. I had to put new batteries in it about 2 or 3 times. Not sure what's going on there. But that is the view from the Midwest. What is your view on the topic that I talked about today? Do you think there's going to be big changes with the St. Louis Blues player rotation? Or do you think it's going to be mostly the same, maybe 1 or 2 new faces in the lineup? Until the next time, though. I'll see you then.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space.